Never mind. I'm good. Cynthia, I'm good.
Thank you, Mayor.
Good morning. This is Jared Demings. Just letting you know I'll be on initially without video.
Okay, thank you very much, Mayor. Okay, Mr. Chairman, we are recording and we are now also streaming live to YouTube, so you can go ahead and begin the meeting whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Cynthia. Welcome to the virtual MetroPlan Orlando meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order. My name is Bob Dilari. I'm one of the county commissioners of Seminole County, as well as the chair of MetroPlan Orlando, and be chairing the meeting today. I'd like to also have our team of folks working on to ensure this meeting smoothly. I want to thank them all. Today's meeting was advertised on the MetroPlan Orlando website and social media, as well as targeted emails. The Florida sunshine typically requires a quorum to physically be present in a room for a government meeting. However, our Governor DeSantis suspended this requirement in executive order, allowing government boards to conduct businesses using virtual meetings. This order has been extended through June 30th of this month. Now at this time, I'd like to have the Pledge of Allegiance. I'd like to ask Commissioner Stiplin to recite the pledge. Can we all mute our mics? Commissioner?
Thank you, Chairman. Before we begin, I'd just like to make a statement. You know, as a mother of 2 Black boys, we're in a very pivotal time in our country and also in our local communities. And I hope that, you know, as we think about what we can do as leaders to actually change some of the things that we're seeing, how can we make our society better for our future? I would just want us, as we recite the pledge, to think about that, how we truly can make a change and be intentional about it, not just talk about, you know, how we want things to change, but actually be intentional in making things happen differently for the future generations. So with that being said, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for those words prior to the pledge. Very well said and appropriate. Next, we'll have a short video to review the virtual meeting guidelines. Staff?
Welcome to MetroPlan Orlando's virtual meeting. Here are some things you should know. Board and committee members are active participants, and members of the public are observers. Our chairperson will make sure to keep the meeting flowing. Please keep your microphone or phone line muted unless recognized to speak. Make sure to pay attention to your video controls as well. Participants are welcome to use the raise hand feature to ask questions after presentations. This feature can be found when clicking on the participant's icon. When recognized by the chair to speak, you can unmute yourself. Please make sure to speak clearly so everyone can hear you. You may also submit questions via the chat box by clicking on the chat icon. A moderator will relay your question. Thank you.
Thank you. So we need to keep our microphones muted unless we are recognized to speak. And I promise that I'll be asking staff to verify if anyone has their hands raised or has a comment that needs to be acknowledged. There'll be 2 public comment points in the meeting. Members of the public who have been asked to speak will use the raised hands features found in the participation tab. If attended by the phone, you can hit the *9 to raise your hand and request to be recognized. When called, your microphone will be temporarily unmuted by staff, and you'll be asked to state your name and the contact information for the record. We'll also accept comments by email or phone messages before the meeting. Guidelines of public comments are posted on the MetroPlanOrlando.org/virtual meeting. Public comments received before the meeting will be read by staff at the conclusion of today's meeting. We want this and all future online meetings to be accessible to all. Participants may join by computer, tablet, or phone. If you need help in participating in the future, please contact the Metro Orlando office and staff will be willing to help you. Now we want to recognize the passing of a former Orange County Commissioner, Mayor Johnson, longtime MetroPlan Orlando board meeting. Some of you may have known or remember Commissioner Johnson either for her service as a county commissioner or City of Orlando council. She was a great public servant.
Mr. Chairman, before you move on, there was a hand raised by Mayor Alvarez a little earlier. I wasn't sure if he was checking. So Mayor Alvarez, not sure if he had a question.
Mayor?
Just checking in. I popped in a little bit later because I was in another meeting that couldn't get out so I popped in a little later, so I apologize. That's why I was just checking in.
Mayor, there is no need to apologize with everything going on with virtual meetings. A lot of us, including myself, sometimes don't need to apologize.
Thank you, sir.
Next, I'd like to move to the Transportation Disadvantaged Local Coordinating Board. There was a meeting of the Transportation Disadvantaged Local Coordinating Board on May 14th, and Mayor Alvarez is the chair of that committee. Mayor, do you have any comments?
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and board members. The quarterly TDLCB meeting was held on Thursday, May the 14th. Our action items included approval of our previous meeting minutes, approval of the Transportation Disadvantaged Service Plan minor update. This approval included revision to the current eligibility criteria and appointing a task force to provide guidance to access links on revisions to their eligibility application. We also approved the 2021 rate calculation. Our presentation included an update on mobility services from the Community Transportation Coordinator, a presentation of the results of the 2019 CTC evaluations, and an update on the 2045 Florida Transportation Plan. Our next meeting is August the 13th, and this concludes my report, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I would myself like to report out. Does anybody have any questions for the mayor?
Mr. Chairman, you do have a hand by Commissioner Viviana Janer.
Okay, Commissioner Janer.
Yes, thank you so much. First of all, I also joined late. I had some technical difficulties. As a matter of fact, I don't have my video on because I'm having problems here. But I had a question for Mayor Alvarez on the coordinating board. Your meeting, was that just recently? Were there any comments from any riders of any challenges to their transportations during the crisis? Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Delary.
Thank you. Mayor?
Yeah, we took that under consideration, and we heard the process that Access Links was doing, and it was working as an access to every rider that needed the services.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
So you know the raised hands. We'll move on. The next update will be from the Central Florida Commuter Rail Commission, which I'll be reporting on since I sit on that board. Sunrail received $29.8 million of CARE fund, which is helping offset some of the cost of loss that's happened over the COVID-19. Ridership was good as we entered the month of March. However, ridership did drop from our daily number of about 7,000 riders to a low of 800 riders per day. Ridership is slowly now coming back to around 1,800 riders per day. We do have a new security team that's been added to help with distancing. We've also had additional cleaning crews. They've added sanitizers, hand sanitizers on the train. They're sanitizing the trains. And also for distancing, no ticket validation has been taken care of by the conductors. I want to particularly thank all the Sunrail staff. They're doing a phenomenal job during these unprecedented times. Any questions from our board regarding Sunrail? Any raised hands, staff?
There are no raised hands at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, great. Next, I'd like to move on and welcome our new Florida Department of Transportation District Secretary. As you all know, we have a new FDOT District 5 Secretary. We all had the opportunity to meet Secretary Perdue when he joined back in November. At this time, back in November, he was the interim secretary. I am pleased to announce that after serving 5 months as interim, he was appointed to that position. I look forward to the time as we move forward working with the secretary, and I would like to ask if he has any words that he would like to talk to us about. Secretary?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman and MPO board members. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you this morning. As the chairman noted, I have been serving in an interim role for 5 months. When I came down to Central Florida from the Panhandle, it was intended just to be an interim role, but you know, we've been working through a lot of challenges that you all are very aware of, and through that time, you know, I feel like that I have become a part of the community in Central Florida and a part of the FDOT District 5 team, which is exceptional from day to day. And I'm really excited about continuing to build the relationships that are so critical to moving us forward into the future. There's a lot going on in Central Florida. There's a lot of growth. The economy is getting ready to recover from COVID, and the growth is going to continue. Central Florida is an amazing place with a lot of challenges. I really appreciated Commissioner Siplin's words of encouragement. I think we have some tremendous opportunities moving forward to work together and really come together as communities and move into the future, not only with transportation, but with everything in public and private sectors. You know, one thing I would like to highlight as we continue progressing through the governor's Safe Smart step-by-step plan to reopen Florida. You know, there's going to be a lot of challenges, and as public and private sector entities are evaluating the impacts to both budget and revenues, you know, there's never been a time more important than this for us to pull together as communities and get through these challenges and get back to normal. So it's really, you know, there's a lot of future challenges for us, but it's still a really exciting time, and I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very thankful to Secretary Tebow and Governor DeSantis for affording me this opportunity. The one thing I wanted to leave with you is, you know, the biggest transportation project in Florida right now is in Central Florida, and it's I-4 Ultimate. We have approximately 18 months left on that project. We've made a lot of progress, tremendous progress. There's a lot of good things happening, and the traffic, the positive impacts to traffic are starting to become very evident. And I want to leave this with you as a board, because your role in transportation is extremely critical. And I-4 Ultimate is a project that was planned 20 plus years ago, and we are just now building it today. So if you think about that, and you think about the future of Central Florida and the growth that's occurring and the needs that are going to be in the future, it's going to involve a lot more than just roadways. You know, we have a lot of challenges, and in order to continue to move people, goods, and services safely, we're going to have to embrace all of the modes of transportation and really focus on giving people choices in the future, choices that they want to use. The more choices that are available, the more efficient and the safer transportation will be for everybody. So that's just something to think about as the MPO looks at the long range plan and you're going through your scenario planning and looking at all the potential scenarios of the future. I think one of the things we can really focus on is how do we provide more transportation choices for the residents of Central Florida. With that, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. And Secretary, sometimes the word congratulations just doesn't express it enough, but I want to say that both the governor and the secretary made the right decision. And I thank them both for making that decision to make you permanent. Any questions for the District 5 Secretary? Any hands up?
None at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move forward. Since everyone is hard at work dealing with COVID-19 and getting our economy back on track and back to work, I'm asking each one of the chairs or mayors of the large entities to report out. At this time, I'd like to ask Mayor Demings for a quick update. Mayor?
Good morning. It has been some challenging times for us. I say here within our community, we kind of have a trifecta at this time because this past week, we not only had to deal with the pandemic, but we've been dealing now for probably a week and a half with multiple demonstrations within the community. And then we had a weather phenomenon with a tornado that touched down here in the community. So our community has been stressed in many ways, but I believe that as we come out of it, we'll be stronger, safer, and better together. So let me just talk briefly about where we are here currently within Orange County. We have continued to test a number of people here. We have tested over 80,000 people within our community, and we have a relatively low positivity rate of about 2.8, 2.9%. We have now approached 2,400 positive people who have tested positive for the virus within our community. So each day we continue to have new cases, but that rate is very low. Probably will be somewhat exacerbated by the large crowds and the gatherings that have occurred. We're seeing our average age now of individuals who are testing positive is getting younger at this point. And perhaps some of that is to be expected with the recent developments. But we are a long way from exceeding our hospital capacities within the community. And that's one of the things that we really have to closely monitor. As we have reopened now, several of our large theme parks are now back in business on June the 11th. We know that we will have SeaWorld that will begin their operations, and July the 11th, Disney will open the Magic Kingdom and Animal Kingdom, and then other parks will follow thereafter. So that's good news for our community. We will host our very first large-scale event, the AAU volleyball tournament at the Orange County Convention Center, July the 14th through the 28th, and over 10,000 competitors will participate in that. But it will be without fans or spectators in the group. You all have seen some general overtures about some of the other professional sports that will be announcing soon that they'll be playing here at the Disney Wide World of Sports. And it's my understanding that as they re-engage, that too will be without fans or spectators present, but they will be broadcast. So we'll begin to see some professional sports back on our television. We continue to deal with the virus by identifying within our community, and strike teams moving within those respective areas. We've worked through an economic recovery task force here that has a regional emphasis. We have collaboration and membership of the 40 plus members from throughout the region, and that has seemingly worked very well for us. We just remain prayerful and hopeful that we will not see a second surge of the virus within our community that will be worse than the first peak that we saw, which goes back to really around April 10th through the 12th. During that period of time is when we saw our peak here in terms of the highest positivity rate and of new cases within our community. So we stand at somewhere around 45 deaths. You know, that's the sad part about it. There's still people who are dying of the virus, and it'll be a ways before we obviously have either a cure or a vaccine for the virus. So we're going to have to continue to live with that, which has required all of us to adjust our business practices. And here within Orange County, we've had certain business functions, certain facilities that was closed to the public. We'll be gradually reopening those facilities back up to the public. This past Monday, the courts opened with some reduced activities within the courts. They began certain hearings. At that point, we'll begin to kind of phase in the opening of county facilities, parks, et cetera. So we're getting a business of it. We started on Monday of this week, crisis assistance through the CARES Act funding that we received here in Orange County. We received about $243 million. 72.9% of it was set aside to assist families and individuals. And we rolled out an assistance for families and individuals per household to get up to $1,000. We believe that we should be able to benefit a significant number of households with those funds. At $1,000 per household, we perhaps will take care of as many as 60 to 65,000 different households with the funding. We also set aside $72.9 million for business assistance. The rollout for the business assistance went a little bit smoother than it did for the individual and families. We anticipate assisting up to 6,500 businesses with $10,000 grants. We continue to take applications for that. So I can tell you that's where we are. Our goal is to fill the gap between whatever resources that become available through federal or state sources and other means within our community. We want to try to get money in the hands of businesses as quickly as possible. We're working to try to make certain that as we re-engage that we can do so safely. So we are providing personal protective equipment in the community. We've given out over 3 million masks, probably approaching 700,000 bottles of hand sanitizer and other things that we have provided with in the community because of the CARES Act funding. We qualified for that because of in order to have direct allocations of funding, you had to have a local population of 500,000 or more. And so many of the counties and municipalities were not large enough to get direct allocations. Perhaps that's coming with federal funding. Otherwise, the state of Florida received the funds, and many of our local communities are pressuring the governor to begin to allocate funds to other local governments. But any of the funds that I talked about, they are available to Orange County residents only, and then there are other criteria that's for it. So, Mr. Chairman, that's my quick update. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate your hard work and your leadership. Now I'd like to ask the Mayor of Orlando, Mayor Dyer. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Mayor Demings pretty adequately covered Orlando as well as Orange County. I'll just add a couple things. We've had protests every day for, 10 or 11 days now. And other than the first couple of days, they've been largely peaceful. I don't think we've had an arrest the last 5 or 6 days, and we had our largest protest on Saturday with more than 10,000 people participating in downtown Orlando. We've had 3 events I've never seen in my lifetime, which is a pandemic, a tornado in the city limits of Orlando, and a peaceful protest with more than 10,000 people. I will mention the tornado. We were very fortunate. There was a substantial amount of property damage, but no reported injuries whatsoever. So we're very thankful for that. We continue to stand up neighborhood testing sites related to COVID. We're out in Lake Nona today, and we continue to have great interest in those testing sites. So people continue to be tested, and I've been tested myself and tested negative. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At this time, move to Osceola County. Commissioner and Chairman, Commissioner Chainer.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in Osceola County, we have about 762 cases, and we're testing about 4.7% approximately positive. We continue to make testing a priority, and hopefully we'll see those percent positive numbers continue to trickle down. During my last report, we were at about still a 7 or 8%. So it is going down. In terms of opening up safely, we're doing a couple things. We're working with our Back to Work Task Force. We're working with the Orange County Economic Partnership Task Force, and we're pleased that we were able to take some general fund dollars slated for economic development to go ahead and help some of our small businesses with up to $5,000 in loan to offset some of their expenses. We did not qualify for the CARES Act funding because we have under 500,000 people. We have reached out to the governor and are trying to coordinate with other counties to try to get that critical funding into our county. So I'll keep you posted as to that. In terms of our residents, we have done 3 rounds of rental assistance, and we're gearing up to do at least 2 other rounds. We did receive from the CARES Act some CDBG funding of about $936,000, and we have voted to allocate all of that into additional rental and mortgage assistance for our residents, and that'll be gearing up soon. That is my very brief update, Commissioner Delary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I would ask Chairman and Commissioner Zimbauer to report, but he's having some technical difficulties at this time to get on, and staff is trying to help him. So we'll come back to him at a later date, at a later time in the meeting. But before we move on, I would want to say that I'm very impressed and pleased with all the peaceful demonstrations. It's quite a sight to behold, and it's needed. And I'm glad that it's all peaceful, and it's important that it is peaceful. At this time, we'll move on to our Executive Director, Gary Hutman. Gary, for announcements.
Good morning, Chairman Delary, board members, and all those attending online. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to remind you again about the virtual meeting protocols. I'd like to thank everyone for helping us make these virtual meetings a success, and we remain committed to having good discussions about transportation planning in Central Florida. And we're doing our best in this environment to stay transparent and accessible to the public. As Chairman Delary mentioned, we'll be using the raise hands feature to recognize board members during the meeting and to call on members of the public during the public comment time. If you joined us on the phone only, without the video screen, please use *6 to mute and unmute your line, and please use *9 to raise your virtual hand so the meeting host can see that you wish to be recognized. And then after being recognized and speaking, please use *9 again to lower your hand. And then you'll see that there's a chat feature in your toolbar. This communicates with all panelists in the meeting and includes board members, staff, and presenters. But please only use this if you are having technical issues and need some assistance. A full record of the chat comments will be included with the public record of this meeting this morning. This morning, we have two board alternates with us. Chairman Delary, we have Commissioner Gomez Cordero is here representing Orange County, and she's here in place of Commissioner Bonilla. We also have Ms. Lee Pullum, who is the Vice Chair of the Technical Advisory Committee, and she's here representing them in place of Nabil Muhaisen. So thank you both for taking the time to be with us this morning. Other announcements include the 2020 DOT Mobility Week. This is the third annual event, and it's scheduled this year from October 30th to November 6th. And I understand that the state is considering ways to make this event more resilient and how they might host some events if they need to virtually throughout the week. And as I hear more about this, I'll certainly keep the board and the committees informed. And there is a letter from Secretary Perdue that's included in your agenda packages this morning. You'll find that in tab 4. The National Association of Regional Councils that we're a very active part of had their virtual annual meeting this week. We were scheduled to be in Detroit, and Detroit went to a lot of work to host this meeting, and was very disappointing for them to have to give that up. But that's the world that we're living in right now. But it was a very busy two-day event Monday and yesterday. Sessions included a discussion of the economic fallout, public safety, and emergency management. I found that particularly interesting because the panel for that was included two nurses who are NARC board members, as well as a retired police officer, also a NARC board member. Then we had a presentation on transportation and mobility, followed by the National League of Cities and the National Association of Counties had a panel. And then yesterday there was a session that was entitled What We've Learned from the Pandemic and How to Bridge Toward a Resilient Future. And that was put on jointly by the Atlanta Regional Commission and the AARP. And it was just very interesting to hear them talk about what's going on in the Atlanta region, how much telework is playing a part, and some survey work that they've done. That up to 69% of the executives in the Atlanta region that they surveyed indicated that remote working is working for them, and they see it as part of their business model going forward. And then we ended the day yesterday with a lengthy transportation policy discussion having to do with the draft federal bill that's been put out. And I'd just like to give credit to NARC, Leslie Wallach and Eric Zimmerman and their entire staff has been doing a great job working through our virtual operations with weekly calls and keeping everyone engaged, sharing thoughts and ideas. So they've just done a great job. Then the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee did issue a draft reauthorization bill last week, and it's entitled It's the Invest in America Act, and that stands for Investing in a New Vision for the Environment and Surface Transportation in America Act. And it's just last week, it's 800 and some pages, so everyone's just kind of working their way through it. But it is a 5-year bill. $494 billion total. But the first year of the bill is actually just an extension of the current FAST Act. So when it comes down to new policy in this bill, it would be effective for 4 years. But there's some good news in there for the what we refer to as the Service Transportation Block Grant Program. We as MPOs are pleased with the proposed changes in that. It also looks to establish a high-performing MPO category, whereby MPOs would be given additional authority based on meeting several criteria, and that's exciting to many of the larger MPOs across the country. And there was considerable discussion of that yesterday afternoon. And we also anticipate increased funding. We refer often when it comes time to adopting our UPWP of the PL funding, and that's the federal money that we get for planning. And that is significantly or proposed to have a significant bump up, but there's also some new planning requirements that would go along with that. So as we learn more, I'll certainly keep the board informed of that. Jumping now to the I-4 corridor, we've talked about this a number of times before the committees and the board, but we've been working for a while on that with DOT and the other MPOs across the corridor from Orlando to Tampa, working to establish a more regional and consistent approach to how we manage I-4 throughout, manage traffic rather, throughout the entire I-4 corridor, and taking full advantage of the technology that's available to us, and making sure that there's consistency in that technology as you cross from one jurisdiction to another. But we've identified several grants, actually 3 grant opportunities that are now available to us, and we are making those applications, all 3 of those applications. And I would like to, as part of today's meeting, just by, if there are no objections, that we would go ahead as a board, and I would prepare a letter for the chairman's signature that we could use to submit with those grant applications. And then we'll also be asking for letters from our federal and state representatives and from the Orlando Economic Partnership, as well as the Tampa Bay Partnership. We see it as a great opportunity to draw attention to the cooperation that we believe exists in the transportation world in Central Florida. So it does look like we'll be able to have our next meeting based on some survey work that we've done at 9 o'clock on June 29th. And perhaps that letter then will be part of that agenda package, and we'll have that ready for you to take a look at. But the meeting on June 29th will take the place of our July meeting, and it will allow us to conduct business in what is likely to be, may very well be one last time virtually. And we did that so that we did not have to rush to bring in a quorum of the board. So that we can, and the need to provide adequate spacing for all of the board members as well as the public. And by doing this, that will essentially give us a couple of months to work out some of the details on how we might go about having actual meetings in our boardroom and being able to accommodate spacing and the public that may show up. Chairman Dilawri and board members, I know that everyone's been busy running around and attending virtual meetings and the many other concerns that we've all had for the past few months. But I do want to remind everyone that that this morning is scheduled to be Steve Bechtel's final meeting as your legal counsel. And we talked about this several meetings ago, that this would be coming up. And just like everyone else who's celebrating major life events right now, graduations, high school graduations, college graduations, weddings, what have you. This is not how we or Steve anticipated this to happen. But I want you to know that we're discussing options to celebrate Steve's many years with MetroPlan. Commissioner Chairman Dilawri, would you like to weigh in on this?
Yes, Gary, if there's no objection from the board, I'd like to bring Mr. Bechtel back when we have a full board meeting in person to properly recognize him. I believe that Mr. Bechtel has been involved with transportation and MPO for over 30 years now. And how many years, Steve? Can't hear you. 45, I think he said. Well, a number of years. And I think it'd be prudent for us to congratulate him and to acknowledge him in person. So, Gary, when we do have the board fully back in person, I'd like to put him on the agenda.
Okay, we will do that.
I think one more thing, Gary, if I may. I just want to make sure there's no objections to the chair signing a letter of support for the grant. Are there any hands raised for objecting to that? Staff?
Mr. Chairman, there are no hands. Let me just give it a second just to make sure. No hands at this point.
Okay, so with that, I will ask staff to proceed with a letter, and I'll also ask Gary to contact all the cities associated as well as the counties associated with the MPO, and to see which cities and counties would be willing to put a letter of support as well. Gary?
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Delary. I'll certainly do that. And that completes my announcements this morning, but now we'd like to move straight into taking attendance. So I'll ask Kathy Goldfarb to call the roll so that we can confirm a quorum for this morning's meeting.
Thanks, Gary. All board members, please go ahead and unmute yourselves in preparation for the roll call, and you can go on mute again after your name is called. Make sure your video is on if possible so we can confirm it's you. You'll find the unmute and video buttons on the bottom left side of your toolbar on the bottom of your screen. Please say here or present when your name is called. Alvarez.
Present.
Arrington. Arrington. Bates. Gomez Cordero. Gomez Cordero.
Present.
Delary.
Here.
Demings.
Present.
Dyer.
Here.
Good.
Here.
Grebe. Janer.
Here.
McDonald.
Here.
Moore.
Here.
Nelson.
Here.
Ortiz.
Here.
Siplin.
Present.
Smith.
Here.
Woodruff.
Here.
Uribe.
Present.
Vanderlei.
Here.
Zembauer.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chair, Commissioner Harrington here. I had technical difficulties checking in earlier.
Okay, we'll have the record show that you did say present.
Thanks,
Before
sir.
we move on to the review of the agenda, I would like to ask Chairman and Commissioner Zimbauer to report out on what's happening with Seminole County regarding the COVID-19 and bringing the population back to work, our economy. Commissioner Zimbauer, Chairman.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning to everyone from Seminole County. I hope everybody is making their way through this new times that we're conducting business in, with all the challenges with technology that many of us are experiencing from day to day. Seminole County, on the COVID front, we're currently sitting at 563 positive cases. We've got, unfortunately, 13 deaths. We're running at a 2.3% positivity rate. We've now run approximately 24,723 tests. We feel pretty good about the 2.3% positivity rate, considering where we started initially with the COVID. We've thus far spent about $3.5 million in direct costs related to the COVID from our emergency management preparation and so forth related to the COVID-19 event. We have approximately been reporting about $78 million worth of economic impact from the businesses that were surveyed throughout Seminole County, and the downturn impacts directly related to the COVID-19. We last week opened up a grant program for our small businesses, and by 3 hours into the program, we had filled about 4 times the amount of applications that we're going to be able to help. The grant program is designed initially to provide up to $5,000 worth of relief to small businesses. It can be used for anything from payroll. It can be used for PPE. It can be used for rent or mortgage payments. It can be used for any additional equipment related to the turn in the economy. From a county perspective, we 2 weeks ago reopened the county buildings to the public. Some of those are on a appointment basis. We do ask that face coverings be used and face masks be used as they enter in. We have converted all of our customer relationship areas with protective barriers. Many of them are plexiglass, some of them are glass in nature. We have enhanced cleaning throughout the entire county buildings, and all the county staff rotates in and out, maintaining their social distancing. We continue to hold meetings virtually for our county commission as well as our advisory boards, and we will do so through the end of June. July 1st, we intend to have the majority of our employees that are capable of returning to work back in the buildings. Go back to our, I guess, new normal with having in-person meetings beginning July 1st. We continue to monitor that. On the front of the civil unrest that everybody's had questions, we are fortunate here in Seminole County that we have had, for all practical purposes, peaceful assembly. We support that here in Seminole County, and many of us as elected officials have joined those individuals in that peaceful assembly. We continue to discuss and work with our regional partners on all those fronts as well. With that, that concludes the got from Seminole, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, we'll go to agenda review. Mr. Hutman.
Yeah, Chairman DeLauria, I'd like to draw attention to two items on the agenda this morning. And those, the first is agenda item Roman numeral 10, letter K, and it's the annual FDOT state certification report. That review was held back on February 4th, and it's an item that is generally presented to the board for your information, but to save time on the agenda this morning, we'd included it as an information item for acknowledgement. But I do want to just say that it's a good report, excuse me, with no corrective actions, and a score of 100% on the risk assessment portion of the review. And that's important. That's an indication of the confidence that the department has in us as an organization to do things right. So we feel good about that review, and you should too. And then agenda item Roman numeral 10M is a presentation of the TIP. Typically, Keith Caskey gives that to all the committees and to the board this time of year as a preview, and then it's on your next meeting agenda for approval. This year, we're doing it a bit differently. We recorded the presentation to allow members to preview it as you have time to do that. And Keith did a very good job and Leilani did a very good job of presenting that and recording it. So that's available. I believe you all have a link to it. But Keith will do an abbreviated presentation at your next meeting before you are asked to approve the document. So Chairman DeLauria, I just felt that it was important to mention those two agenda items, but there are no other changes to the agenda, and we're prepared to proceed.
Okay. Thank you, Gary. And we'll move on. If there's no objections, any raised hands, staff?
None at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Move on to committee reports. First committee report by the chair would be Municipal Advisory Committee. Mayor? You have to unmute your mic, Mayor. Mayor, unmute your mic.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Oh, very good. Thank you. Again, good morning, Mr. Chairman and board members. Good to see all of you. The Municipal Advisory Committee met June 4th this year. We approved our May meeting minutes. We recommended approval of an amendment to the fiscal year 2019-2020 through 2023-24 TIP to include 2 new railroad crossing safety projects and CARES Act funding for links to deal with COVID-19 issues. We also recommended approval of the functional classification for 2 segments of the Wekiva Parkway. We received 5 presentations, including a preview of the fiscal year 2020-2021 through 2024-25 TIP, that was pre-recorded, as you mentioned very well, by Keith Katsky and Leilani. A preview of the 2025, 26 through 2039, 40 prioritized project list, a 2045 MTP status update and report on needs assessment methods and an approach, a presentation on FDOT traffic incident management program, and then also a presentation on Lynx bus fleet. Now, our next meeting is being rescheduled from July 2nd to June 25th. And we're looking forward to that. And that concludes my report, which makes all of you very happy.
Thank you, Mayor. Any questions for the mayor? Do we have any raised hands?
None at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor. This time, we move to the Community Advisory Committee. Sarah?
At our May 27th virtual meeting, the Community Advisory Committee recommended support for the Florida Department of Transportation amendment to the Transportation Improvement Program and for updating the functional cost of the Wekiva Parkway. Members previewed the draft of the next Transportation Improvement Program by video. Thank you to staff for providing that ahead of time. And we asked questions during the meeting. Members received preliminary information about MetroPlan's June 22nd virtual TIP public meeting. CAC members also heard updates on the 2045 plan, the draft prioritized project list, FDOT's traffic incident management program, and the Lynx bus fleet. John Slott of Lynx discussed the agency's long-term plans for a cleaner fueled fleet and addressed several questions that had grown out of our April discussion on whether and how quickly Lynx officials can move toward electric technology. The next CAC meeting will be held June 24th, and it may be our last virtual meeting.
Thank you, Sarah. Any questions for the Community Advisory Committee? Do we have any raised hands?
There are no raised hands, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to Technical Advisory Committee. Lee?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. The Technical Advisory Committee met on May 29th. We recommended approval of the TIP amendment requested on today's agenda. We also recommended approval of FDOT's request to update the functional classification of the Wekiva Parkway. We heard presentations on the fiscal year 2021-24 TIP, which was pre-recorded for prior viewing, and then during the meeting we were able to ask questions. We also heard presentations on the fiscal year 2026 through 2040 prioritized project list, the 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan multimodal needs assessment, FDOT's traffic incident management program, and Lynx's bus fleet. That concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We'll now ask if there's any questions for the Technical Advisory Committee. Do we have any raised hands, staff?
There are none at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Seeing none, we'll move on to the Transportation System Management and Operation Committee. Doug?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. The TSMO committee met on May 29th. We approved our April 24th meeting minutes. We approved the staff recommendation to amend the fiscal year 2019-20 through 23-24 TIP, which includes 2 new railroad crossing safety projects and CARES Act funding for Lynx to deal with COVID-19. We approved the FDOT recommendation to have the 2 segments of Wekiva Parkway functional classified as urban principal arterial freeways and expressways. We had a presentation by Mr. John Slott of Lynx on Lynx's bus purchase decision-making process and the other regional considerations required to support the alternative fleet fuels, including electric and CNG. This concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for the Transportation System Management and Operation Committee? Do we have any raised hands?
There are no hands, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. I want to thank all the committee members for all their hard work, especially during these times. Sometimes, even though people can meet virtually, it can be kind of difficult, so I want to thank them all. We're going to move into public comments. This is for action items. Do we have any people that want to speak on action items? If so, please use the raise hands function found at the bottom of your screen or press the *9 on your phone keypad. When I call you to talk, the host will unmute your microphone. You will see a button pop up that says the host wants you to unmute you. Accept the prompt and it'll activate your microphone. When you're asked, please provide your name and address for the record. Individuals will have 2 minutes to speak on any items that are on the agenda. I'd like to ask staff to advise us, do we have anyone have their raised hands?
Mr. Chairman, there are no raised hands on the attendee side.
Okay. Do we have any written or phone comments that need to be submitted pertinent to action items?
It's my understanding, Mr. Chairman, that there were no advanced comments.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to action items. After each action item, I'd like to ask for a motion and a second. Please state your name for the record so that the motioner and the second can be recorded. We'll have a discussion. We'll ask for a vote. We'll ask you to unmute your mics, and then we'll take a voice vote for the motion. If you have any questions, please use the raised hands, which is found as an option under the participation tab at the bottom of your screen. When you're recognized, you can unmute yourself and speak. If you have any audio issues, you can also submit your questions via the chat button at the bottom of the window, and the moderator will relay your questions. The first action on the consent agenda in tab 1, do we have a motion on the consent agenda?
Motion to approve.
Okay, okay, can we have the motioner's name, please?
Mayor Alvarez.
Seconder's name, please.
Carson Good.
Okay, thank you. Any raised hands, staff?
Mr. Chairman, there is no raised hands, but there's a comment by Commissioner Moore. She has a question on the trip list. It may be for staff.
Can we read, is it a written statement, or Commissioner Moore, would you like to?
Thank you, Commissioner Delary. It's at the end of the agenda. And I had reviewed this yesterday, and there was a request to add into the trip list from the city of Apopka several projects, which I researched yesterday and then spoke with Orange County Transportation staff, Renzo Nastasi. So I just have a request to have those items reviewed by the technical review committee, because as much as I support the projects, they need to be regional and consistent with the county. So that was just my one comment about the trip from the city of Apopka at the end of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I'd like to ask staff to take that into consideration and have it reviewed from the technical committee standpoint. Any other comments, staff?
There are no additional raised hands, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. We have a motion. We have a second. All in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Opposed, like sign. I hear no's, so the motion passes. At this time, we'll go into the action items. Approval, the FDOT amendment for fiscal year 2019/20 and 2023-24 TIP. I'd like to have staff present. Staff?
Okay, good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. This amendment includes 2 railroad crossing safety projects in Orange County, and then Links is receiving about $2.3 million in CARES Act funding. And you all have the information on these projects on the slide, on the screen, and then also in your agenda packets. So unless there's any questions, we're asking for your approval of the amendment.
I'd like to ask the board or any questions. We have any raised hands, staff?
There are no raised hands, Mr. Chairman, but let's give it just a second in case someone. No raised hands, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Do we have any written statements that need to be addressed?
There are no questions or comments in the chat box, Mr. Chairman.
Okay,
Motion
great.
for approval by Janer.
Second, Uribe.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion from the board? I believe this is a roll call vote. I'd like to ask staff to call the vote.
Alvarez,
Aye.
Arrington,
Aye.
Gomez Cordero,
Aye.
Delari,
Aye.
Demings,
Aye.
Dyer,
Yes.
Good,
Yes.
Grieve, Janer,
Yes.
McDonald,
Yes.
Moore, Commissioner Moore,
Kathy, let's come back to Commissioner Moore if she's having some technical difficulties.
Nelson,
Yes.
Ortiz,
Yes.
Ziplin,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Woodruff,
Yes.
Uribe,
Yes.
Vanderlei,
Yes.
Zembauer,
Yes.
Moore,
All right, thank you, Kathy. Did the vote
motion
pass?
the motion passes.
Okay, thank you. This time moving to action items, which is the approval of SR 429 and SR 453, the Wakava Parkway Functional Classification 8. At this time, we'll hear from staff, or DOT, I should say. Sorry.
Hi, good morning. This is Steve Shams of FDOT District 5 Planning. I'd like to thank you for considering this request, and I appreciate your time. Next slide, please. FDOT District 5 would like to request the functional classification of Wakaiba Parkway, State Road 429 and 453. Functional classification is a requirement of federal highway, and its purpose is to establish a roadway's importance. It's used for planning, budgeting, programming, and fiscal management. It is necessary to meet federal requirements and is also integral to both FDOT's work program and the NPO's transportation improvement programs. The subject segments are State Road 429 and 453. These roads completed construction on March 31st, 2018, and were open to traffic. Last summer, work was completed to enter these roads into FDOT's RCI and LRS programs. We completed the roadway inventory, and we produced the straight line diagrams. At the time of inventory, these roads were given a proposed functional classification of urban principal arterial, freeways, and expressways by FDOT Central Office. This classification is consistent due to its location within the urban boundary, its status as a limited access principal arterial, and the use of toll facilities. Completing the functional classification will satisfy the district's statutory requirement to functionally classify all significant roadways in the district. Next slide, please. On the left is a map of State Road 429 in Orange County. This roadway ends at the Lake County line and has a proposed functional classification of urban principal arterial, freeways, and expressways. On the right, there is a map of State Road 453 in Orange County. This road also ends at Lake County line and carries the same proposed functional classification. We also submitted the same request to the Lake Sumter TPO. So we do intend to carry this functional classification to the roadways terminus at State Road 46. I appreciate your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you all may have. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to ask staff, are there any raised hands?
Don't see any raised hands at this time, Mr. Chairman. Let me just scroll through real quickly. There are no raised hands.
Okay, are there any written comments?
No comments in the chat box, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Are there any questions from the board? Seeing none, I'd like to ask for direction and or a motion.
A motion to, for approval of the request.
And please state your name.
Dale McDonald.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any other comments? This is not a roll call vote, so we just call the vote. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Opposed, like sign. Hearing no opposed, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item we have is for information acknowledgement. I'd like to ask if we have a motion to accept the informational items that are acknowledged on tab 4.
So moved.
Motion for acknowledgement, Jana.
Jana made the motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Do we have any raised hands, staff?
There are no raised hands, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any written comments?
No comments or questions in the chat box.
Okay, great. There's no roll call vote needed. Signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign? Opposed, like sign? Seeing none, the motion passes. This time we're going to presentations. There'll be 3 presentations today. Please use your raised hand function to be recognized if you want to ask a question. You may raise your hand during the presentation and indicate you'd like to ask that question, but please hold your question until the presentation is at the end. If you have any audio issues, you can type your question into the chat box and the moderator will relay the question. The first presentation will be on the 2045 MPT needs assessment and methodology. If you can recall from our last meeting, which was a very good presentation in scenario planning, so board members had some questions on the scenarios planning. So Alex was asked to prepare some additional discussions that the board may want to have. Alex, I understand that you've addressing scenario plannings first to see if you still have any unanswered questions, and then move on to the needs assessment. We'll now ask Alex to present. Staff?
Good morning, Commissioner Delary and board members. As Commissioner Delary said, I'll be introducing a new topic today, assessing transportation needs. Before I do that, I'll provide a recap of the scenario planning process and also allow some time to answer any questions you may have and have a discussion about what the future has in store for us. So again, this slide provides a quick overview of the scenario planning concept. This approach is about trying to better understand the changes, the risks, and the disruptions we may be facing, and how this will impact our plan as we look at the year 2045. We'll also look how we think about investment and the strategies we are pursuing to accomplish our regional mobility goals and objectives. So this is accomplished really by answering 4 core questions. Where are we today? Where could we be going? How do we prepare? And finally, what is our best path forward? And as I detailed last month, our scenario planning process will be considering 6 key drivers of change, and those include population, economy, visitation, development and land use, technology, and climate. Next slide, please. So based on the feedback from the working group and our advisory committees, we have developed and refined 4 scenarios. Each of these was presented in detail during my presentation last month. But in summary, the traditional trend scenario implies really the continuation of pre-COVID-19 trends and behaviors. So this is really our historic patterns when we look 5-10 years out and continuing those patterns of growth into the future. Technology transformations is a scenario with our region really taking advantage of and really embracing available transportation innovations and what that can mean and how that will impact our other key drivers of change. Climate consequences is our high population growth scenario, which is driven by in-migration patterns, which is caused by sea level rise and other natural phenomenon, which is taking people from the Caribbean and coastal areas and forcing them into Central Florida. And in our final scenario, the one we introduced last month, disruption dilemmas. And this scenario explores the shifts, some declines, and slower growth rates than our region has ever experienced before. This slide also provides a little bit of the narrative, while what you're looking at here provides really the details and the parameters that we'll be using to conduct our technical analysis. So, as we explore the impacts of development, of visitation, of travel patterns and behaviors, and really the implications of connected and autonomous vehicles. And as I mentioned last month, our 4 scenarios, the ones that you see here, really provide us a comprehensive range of alternative futures. So we have a trend scenario, a high growth scenario, a lower growth scenario, and really a technology forward future. I also believe it's important to note at this time that the board will not be asked to adopt a single scenario. Rather, we're going to use these scenarios to identify and prioritize needs. And those needs that are unique and significant to each scenario. So again, as we look at this slide here, we're seeing that, population, varies amongst them. Traditional trends looks at, a 40% growth, which is using the University of Florida's Bureau of Business and Economic Research population forecast of 40% growth by the year 2045. That's about 1 million people. Our climate consequences grows to a higher growth rate based on that in-migration that we talked about before, a higher population growth. Disruption dilemma is going to cause some slowing to the economy and slowing of growth rates, both domestically and internationally. So we're looking at the lower of each of those of the growth. And our technology transformation has a similar medium growth rate. As you can see on this slide, there are some similarities, but also some nuances as it relates to some of the categories and as it relates to the type of land use, the type of economic structure and diversification of the economy, and how that will actually impact travel behavior, as well as age cohort and the behavior of those demographic groups. We can go to the next slide, please. So like I said, this was intended to be a quick recap, and I hope I provided a little bit additional clarity and give you a better understanding of how we're incorporating scenario planning into our 2045 plan. But this slide here provides some questions to ponder and really to share your thoughts today. And before I dive into the next section of my presentation, I can answer any questions you may have regarding scenario planning, how we're going to use it in the process, and any insights that you may have. Commissioner Dilawri, I'll turn it back to you for now to guide discussion on scenario planning.
Great. Any questions from the board on scenario planning? Do you have any raised hands, staff?
I do not see any thus far, Mr. Chairman, but I'll give it a second just in case.
Okay. Do we have any written comments?
No comments in the box, but you do have a raised hand by Mayor McDonald.
Mayor McDonald? Mayor McDonald, please unmute your mic.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry. I've been terrifically impressed with Alex's analysis here in the scenario planning. And obviously, I'm most familiar with those transportation challenges around the city of Maitland and 1792 and Maitland Avenue and Maitland Boulevard issues. And so this has been terrifically insightful, and I really want to thank Alex for the efforts.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to ask staff, do we have any additional raised hands?
None at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'd like to turn it back over to Alex. Proceed, please.
Certainly. So this really the next component of my presentation is going to focus on our approach, our methods, and the tools that we're going to be using to identify needs and opportunities for the 2045 plan. Next slide, please. So I think, as we discuss this needs assessment process, I believe it's important to acknowledge a paradigm shift, and I think a positive one at that. Previous plans evaluated volume to capacity ratios. So we basically looked at how many cars could physically fit on a given road at a given time. And this process primarily yielded highway capacity needs and identified roadway widening projects. And that was it. That would have been my presentation today, and to the other advisory committees. Is the volume to capacity ratio greater than 1? Which is basically saying, is the road congested during peak hours? And of course it is. That's when we're seeing the greatest movements of people as they're trying to get to and from work. But it's a new day, and really it's a new planning process. And as Secretary Perdue mentioned earlier in his remarks, this plan will be about providing a diverse set of options to meet changing traveler needs and desires, both needs and desires. And the 2045 plan will be evaluating needs using a comprehensive set of performance indicators to identify mobility improvement opportunities focused on our overarching goals and objectives. So this plan is going to be less about building roads and more about building opportunities, identifying those and seeing them through to implementation. Next slide, please. Given the complexity of the regional transportation system and really the unique functionality of each mode of travel, we're going to be using several different approaches to analyze multimodal needs. These methods will account for people walking and cycling, those using mass transit, and those who drive their automobiles, while also considering the movement of freight and goods. So over the course of my presentation today, I hope to introduce you to the methods and the tools we'll be using for the 2045 plan, while later presentations this year will be coming back with the projects, the analysis findings based on these methodologies that we're going to be talking about today. Next slide, please. So the first topic I'm going to cover is our pedestrian and bicycle approach, and we can go to the next slide. The pedestrian and bicycle needs assessment is really focused on 4 core areas. The first 2 look at what we have in place today and where are the gaps. So existing facilities and the lack of facilities. The next 2 areas evaluate needs based on that existing network, but then they also consider planned and prioritized projects, things that we already have on the books, priorities that we've already acknowledged their importance, but we want to add value to that. So these steps will actually identify opportunities to supplement and really complement our existing priority projects. How can we make those projects better by taking a larger look at the system? So let's first review the bicycle needs assessment approach. Next slide, please. For bicycle needs assessment, we're actually going to be using what we call a bicycle level of traffic stress, and we're going to be conducting this level of traffic stress analysis over the entire three county roadway network. Level of traffic stress assigns a score to every street in our entire region based on how comfortable it is to ride a bike, based on factors such as traffic volumes, posted traffic speeds, number of travel lanes, and if there is a bicycle facility present. Scores range from 1 to 4, as you can see on the slide here, and it's a street or a bicycle facility with a score of a 1 or a 2 is thought to be comfortable for most people. A score of 3 is comfortable for those confident cyclists. And 4 is typically a higher traffic speed or greater volume facility, which could be uncomfortable for even more experienced riders. Next slide, please. I'll talk about some of the logic here. So let's take a look here at how bicycle level traffic stress is actually categorized. And it's a pretty straightforward decision tree process. And the method really, as I said before, screens streets based on speed, number of lanes, and surrounding land use. So this is the method that you see here for how we will assign scores for streets without a bicycle facility. And those are streets that really just have wayfinding or sharrows only. So this would be that mixed traffic cycling. So no bike lane, things of that nature, no shared use path. For streets with a bicycle facility, the analysis will also consider the type of bike facility, like separated or buffered. Does it have a bike lane? What is the width of that bike lane? And the proximity to on-street parking. Some of our cycle savvy folks, would acknowledge the door zone conflict and that you never want to be in that door zone. So there's definitely an impact there, and we're considering that as part of our planning process. Based on the feedback that we've received from our technical advisory committee, we're also going to be doing a post-screening to look at those level of traffic facilities that scored 1, but that also have daily traffic vehicles per day more than 5,000 or 6,000. So that's going to allow us to take a manual look at those segments, those roads, to make sure that we're categorizing them correctly. Because even if you have low number of lanes, but there's a high volume on those lanes, and we never intend to widen that road, obviously it does create some conflict and may reduce the level of comfort just by so many cars passing you as you ride down. So we can go to the next slide, and I'm going to talk about why we're measuring bicycle level of traffic stress. And the question is why, but I really think it's more about the results and how we move forward following this analysis. Ultimately, as I said before, we're going to identify where programmed improvements in existing priority projects can be leveraged using the existing low stress network that we're going to be identifying through this exercise. So we're going to be identifying additional supporting projects to maximize and really optimize investment. And as I come back to you at future meetings, we'll present some of these value added opportunities and how those projects can be advanced through the project development process. Next slide, please. So the next element of our needs assessment focuses on pedestrian needs. And as we consider those needs, we're looking at how people walk along, but also how they cross the street, how they cross roadways. In identifying critical sidewalk needs, we're going to be assessing needs and opportunities for sidewalks based on the functional classification of a street, where a sidewalk is missing altogether, or where it's only present on one side of the street. We're also going to be looking at the proximity to transit routes and stops, as well as the proximity to schools. So basically, the closer we are, the closer the proximity, the greater the need to fill the gaps. So we acknowledge that we need to fill those sidewalk gaps, but as we're looking at needs identification, obviously we need to fill gaps where there's a greater need, where there's a greater conflict for those who are walking. Next slide, please. And the other additional element for our pedestrian needs assessment is going to look at crossing the street. And that's a focus of this board, bicycle pedestrian safety. And as we're conducting this analysis, we're going to be looking at identifying new locations for marked crosswalks. And to do this, we're going to be looking at the distance between existing crossing locations, as well as crash data. So we're looking at, like I said, that distance, how long it is to cross the street. And then we're actually going to be doing a deeper dive into the crash data to look at those crash records that have behaviors of crashes relating to crossing behavior. So this will allow us to, like I said before, to screen the entire 3-county area and identify opportunities that can be vetted and advanced with more detailed analysis following the plan's adoption. So this is, like I said, about identifying those opportunities to make it more comfortable and safer to cross the street. Our next topic is transit. And transit is a key element of the 2045 plan to address and really respond to our urbanizing and rapidly growing region. So this slide here is our transit approach, and it focuses on really responding to public feedback and service implementation, getting that service out and going and making it go live. Public outreach findings show that people want more frequency and to go to more destinations. So basically more buses to more places, and rail for that matter. This approach is aimed on accomplishing our board's objectives of improving on-time performance, increasing transit system frequency, increasing ridership, while also improving transit access to essential services, housing, and employment centers. Next slide, please. So as we're conducting the transit needs assessment, we're following this 5-step approach that you can see on this slide. Step 1 builds upon and builds on existing plans and studies. So we're looking to the past, looking to work that has been conducted recently, whether it's from links from our local government partners, and seeing how we can incorporate that and grow it regionally. Step 2 takes those best practices and identifies potential solutions, again, at a regional scale. Step 3 begins the process of identifying cost feasible and unfunded transit projects and programs. We're not going to be able to afford it all based on our existing levied transportation funding sources, but we want to look both farsighted yet cost feasible, and that's what we're going to be doing as part of this process. Step 4 sets us up for implementation. So what needs to get done and when to see these projects and programs go live. And finally, step 5, what policies and what strategies need to be revisited to accomplish our regional transit vision. How do we need to readjust? How do we need to realign to make sure that we can accomplish that regional vision and make these projects go live as soon as possible? All this work is being done in close coordination with Lynx, the Sunrail team, as well as our local partner agencies. Next slide, please. Our final topic here for needs assessment is, and it looks at the roadway network. It looks at the network, it looks at its many users, as well as the many intersections that it transects. Our method here, like the other modal categories, is data informed and objective driven. So we're going to be using quantitative criteria to comprehensively evaluate roadway needs. And later on in the process, we're going to identify projects and use our goals and objectives as a means of prioritization. So this approach is intended to provide decision makers with the best information available to align our system planning goals with corridor needs and to adapt to changing demographics and budget constraints. And finally, to guide investment through a performance-based planning process, which is required by federal and state law. As we go to the next slide, this step 1 here provides a snapshot of really the multitude of criteria we'll be using to analyze transportation needs. During my presentation to advisory committees, I provided actually detailed examples for each of these goal areas, though today I'm giving you the abridged version. But I want to assure you that as we prepare our technical documentation for this activity, we'll be clearly defining our methods for each criteria. So this robust analysis can be done so it can be replicated and replicated again with clarity. As we look at safety, that first goal area that we've come to consensus on, these criteria are actually consistent with the safety analysis that we're currently using for our prioritized project list evaluation. For reliability and performance, travel time reliability for automobiles and commercial vehicles is a key indicator. And we're actually going to be adapting this criteria for long-range planning and forecasting purposes by calculating the relative change in travel speeds across each of our alternative futures. So travel time reliability is typically calculated using probe data, cellular data for that matter. But as we don't have that cellular data in the future, we're going to be using the travel demand model and some post-processing to actually calculate that criteria and report it in a similar fashion as we do for the existing probe data. For access and connectivity, we're proposing the use of 6 criteria, and 4 of those 6 criteria will actually identify population and employment centers near transit routes, and we'll also be identifying food and healthcare and cultural and recreational locations within a half-mile of corridors. We're also considering the findings from the critical sidewalk needs analysis from our pedestrian needs assessment. So we're interconnecting all of our different modal needs assessments into our larger multimodal systems analysis. The health and environment criteria really emphasize providing transportation solutions that contribute to improved public health, that reduce the adverse impacts associated with physical inactivity, and of course, preventing the disproportionate adverse impacts affecting our minority and low-income communities. And our final criteria group, investment in economy, these objectives and these criteria focus on the cost of delay, the impacts of visitor travel, where are those visitor travel emphasis corridors, cost burdened households, how do we better serve those areas, truck usage, as well as the intensity of truck trip generating land uses. And that's basically, we're looking at commercial areas, industrial areas, and making sure that these facilities are serving the needs of those cargo carrying vehicles. Our intent here with this category is really to promote transportation projects that expand and really enhance economic prosperity. And before I move on, I really want to acknowledge, as we look at all of these criteria presented today, that some of them actually conflict with one another. But I want to say that that's okay. And as I've said to the advisory committees, that the reality is many of our transportation system is a shared system. It's a very complex system. It serves many users, has many functions and many purposes. And the criteria that we have presented here today and that we're going to be using for our analysis align with our goals and objectives, those comprehensive goals and objectives, but they also encapsulate that conundrum, that multimodal shared transportation system. Next slide, please. So let me put it all together. How will we identify needs? And the answer is really a three-pronged approach. We're going to be utilizing a data model. So this step is actually going to take all of those criteria, those 30+ criteria that we presented on the previous slide, and weave them together using some specialized software to provide a comprehensive and comparable analysis of the entire regional transportation network. The next prong is the consideration of existing plans and priorities. So this will include our prioritized projects list, the transportation improvement program, local government capital improvement plans, as well as some of their studies that they've conducted, transit plans from Lynx, Sunrail, and other regional studies, freight plans, as well as pedestrian and bicycle safety action plans. Something else that we're going to be considering as part of this process is our constrained roadway network, which allows us to look at where we're able to build and where we need to take a more detailed look at solving transportation challenges without widening the road. So serving the needs, the demands, while maintaining the existing footprint. And there's various ways using transit and using systems management and operation strategies to accomplish that while also meeting some of our livability goals. And finally, as I mentioned scenario planning earlier in my presentation, we'll be looking at the unique impacts and the unique needs that are significant to each scenario. And then these impacts will be quantified and then fed back into our data model using an iterative approach. So our next slide, please. And the third step is project identification. So third of the fourth step. And at the end of this planning process, we'll be developing a cost feasible plan like we always have. But we wanted to make sure that it's implemented through our shorter term planning products. And that's our prioritized project list and our transportation improvement program. So this slide should look pretty familiar as these are our priority list categories. And like I said, this plan's about implementation, short-term implementation with a long-term vision. We want to ensure that there's direct implementation and plan consistency. So we're actually organizing and evaluating projects based on their eligibility, consistent with our currently established funding categories and programs. So that's going to allow us to flow directly into our shorter term planning documents. This is not just a long range plan. This long range plan guides short term investment. We go to our next slide, which I'm going to talk about prioritization. And this final step really is about ranking projects for funding. The 2045 plan's prioritization process will take the findings from needs assessment and rank those corridors based on their cumulative regional performance. So it's that big picture, those regional goals and objectives, how these projects impact and serve the regional needs and how they impact performance likewise. So once our analysis is complete, and as we continue through this needs assessment process, we will be working closely with Lynx, with FDOT and our local government partners to refine the project lists to ensure that we have local support and consistency. And also, it's important that these projects are consistent with our local government comprehensive plans. That is a state and federal requirement for long range, our metropolitan transportation plans. So we can go to the next slide, but before I wrap up, I just wanted to call to your attention that we have a meeting of our 2045 plan working group next week. Tuesday the 16th. This presentation that I gave to you in about 20 minutes, we'll be spending over an hour talking about the methods, the tools, diving deeper into the analyses, the calculations. And I want to invite you to that if you are available. That'll give you a much deeper look at how we're going to be conducting this analysis. But for today, I really appreciate your attention, and I am available to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you, Commissioner Lar. I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Alex. We have one raised hand so far, and that's Commissioner Moore. Commissioner, would you unmute your microphone?
Yeah, I did. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I think that was an excellent presentation. I had one question on determining the need particularly on the bike and pedestrian trails. When you're looking at that, I know you were looking at a lot of data points in terms of accidents and the type of road, but how do you determine the level of potential for pedestrians? Do you look at the poverty levels, free, of course I come from school board, free and reduced lunch numbers, or the census data to determine the level of use, so that when you're prioritizing which segments to fund first, can you talk a little bit more about how you would use actual data to determine the level of use by the residents?
So for the actual needs assessment, it will not be looking at socioeconomic data. Though as we get into prioritization and we're conducting that more thorough analysis, we will be looking at those socioeconomic factors, levels of poverty, levels of car ownership, as well as we're going to be incorporating our equity area, our transportation equity area. Equity areas that comes out of our Title VI non-discrimination plan, which is a composite score of a variety of those socioeconomic factors: female head of household, low income, car ownership, as well as a few other factors. So for the needs assessment, it's a very straightforward analysis. But as we get into prioritization, we're going to be looking at additional criteria to see which ones we need to advance first, which will also include those socioeconomic factors to make sure that we're there's not disproportionate impacts, but we're actually serving those needs first.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to ask staff, are there any additional raised hands?
There are none at this time, Mr. Chairman. I'll scroll real quickly to see if there are others. No, sir.
Are there any written statements or questions?
There is a comment by Mayor McDonald. Alex, I appreciate being able to take in the 6/16 meeting. That's by Mayor McDonald.
Okay, seeing no other questions or comments, we'll move on to the next presentation. I want to thank Alex for a very well done presentation to us. This time, we'll move on to the fiscal year 2025, 2026, and fiscal year 2039 and 2040 priority list. Ask staff to present.
Good morning. Yes, I'm here to present our draft project priority list for.
Can you speak up, please?
I'm sorry. Yes, so I'm here to project the draft project priority list for fiscal year 25-6 through 2040 that relates to our current 2040 long-range plan. Not to confuse it with the needs assessment that Alex just presented, that is the development of our 2045 MTP, which will be reflected in next year's project priority list. Just to go over where the project priority list fits within our core products, we have our 2045 long-range plan, as Alex went through the needs assessment. That developed the list of projects and then a cost feasible plan for those projects that we deemed that could be funded through the year 2040. This project priority list is that bridge that gaps that list of cost feasible projects that we forecasted out to 2040 into our 5-year transportation improvement program. And that's where funding is actually committed on the project itself. A couple points that I wanted to make is, I just mentioned it before, there's a direct linkage to the 2040 long range plan, not necessarily those needs and projects that may have been submitted or identified for 2045. It is fiscally constrained based on financial forecasts. So these projects on the list are cost feasible up into the year 2040 based on our projected revenues. And then also the project priority list is organized to support not only our regional priorities, but MetroPlan's TMA funding, which I will get into down the road a little bit. Just to give a little context as to what we're talking about prioritizing in our network, the map on the left is the national highway system and state roads. Those are those major projects that you'll see in our first list for national highway system and state roads. The map on the right are the remaining federal aid system network. And that's where MetroPlan focuses a lot of their TMA priorities and policies on improvements in needs on that network on the right-hand side. So it's broken down into multiple lists. The national highway system and state roads. In this list, we include all roadway widenings, complete streets, transportation systems management and operation projects, bicycle, pedestrian, and then safety with the Sun Trail improvements, all on one list for the national highway and state roads, which we give to the Department of Transportation to help work through their work program. The other lists, which are comprised of roadway complete streets, regional trails and safe routes to schools, transportation systems management and operations, and transit, all utilize the MetroPlan Orlando TMA funds that are allocated to our urbanized area. And it's broken down into the percentages on the left-hand side, which are determined by the board and could be revisited as we start going through the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the next round of cost feasible projects. Just to see how we've done, we've been tracking this over the years with the board emphasis areas as we've been presenting those in February. Back in 2017, 2018, MetroPlan allocated about 52% of the TMA funds towards the policies and the emphasis areas of the board. Over the years, we've increased that to just last year, we were up to about 82% of those TMA funds going towards those board emphasis areas of safety, complete street, regional trail connections, connections to transit, and engaging the millennials, but that really doesn't have a major dollar value. Just as a refresher, how we prioritize our projects, it's a performance-based planning measure where we take the federal performance measures of safety, travel time reliability, bridge and pavement condition, and then transit asset management to start the prioritization, especially on the national highway and state roads. MetroPlan also adopted 9 other performance measures that support our local goals and objectives to prioritize projects to meet some of these needs of evacuation, environmental justice, as Alex was explaining earlier, access to the airports and activity centers, and supporting TSMO with actively managed corridors, and as well as the environment through air quality and stormwater issues. Now I'm just going to highlight some of the project changes that we've seen in this draft. This does not have the new rankings, which will be out and presented to the board and committees during the next cycle. But some of the projects that came off, State Road 50 from Chuliota to 520. This was part of that Colonial Parkway project. Now it is being funded as a 6-lane widening project only. The Turnpike will not be going forward with it. But this project has been funded through construction, so now will be taken off of our project priority list. Also with that is John Young Parkway in Pleasant Hill, the interim quad road project. Orange Ave from Sand Lake to Hoffner will include complete streets improvements with the resurfacing. And then there were 7 other projects added that were either fully funded or not cost feasible. In FDOT, we've also added their routes of significance to our project priority list to support their efforts. There's no funding attached to these, but we want to make sure that we have them on our list for consistency. Now for the MetroPlan program, where we start looking at those TMA funds and how we allocate. Under the complete streets, 5 projects were funded, including Edgewater Drive. We had a couple intersection projects, including Rouse Road and University, trails projects in Kissimmee and Orange County, and then also the Little Econ Phase 3 and Stanspur in Maitland are all reserved for construction. 17th Street was locally funded, so that was removed from our project priority list for that purpose. We also had several new projects added to the list with complete streets, 17 TSMO projects, 3 new safe routes to schools, and 3 new regional trails. For transit capital projects, things will start changing a little bit with the project priority list. Before, we just had a set aside allocation for links to improve transit system. But now we've actually received 3 applications from local governments to assist in the parking deficiencies at Meadowwoods, Point Siena, and Tupperware. So MetroPlan will be conducting a feasibility study with the 2 counties in coordination with DOT and Sunrail to help determine what can actually be done for that parking. But future projects from links will now have to start coming in more of a project list, very similar to the applications that our local governments submit. Now for the trip list, and Commissioner Moore, this hopefully should help address your question on the projects that were added to the trip list. There were 3 new candidate projects for Osceola County and 6 for Apopka. Now our trip list is our Transportation Regional Incentive Program. These are the projects that may exceed the funding limits with the MetroPlan's TMA program. So there's no funding attached to them, but they're there so we can monitor and prioritize for hopefully getting funding down the road in the future. Some of the changes that we could be seeing in the next project priority list, as Alex mentioned with the MTP, they'll still maintain a national highway and state road cost feasible list, but we will also start incorporating some of the policies as we're developing that off-system list by including the 20% of district dedicated revenue funds for premium transit and another 10% for off-system roadway projects. Again, this is just the draft preview of the projects that we've kind of added and taken away. During the next project, I will present a full list of projects showing the rankings and which projects actually move forward and are being considered for funding in that next 5th year of the work program. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Nick. Do we have any raised hands, staff?
Mr. Chairman, there are no raised hands. However, I would like to call attention to a comment that is in a link that has been added to the chat box for those who would like to access the 2045 working group meeting on June 16th at 9:30. A link to that virtual meeting is there if you would like to copy it and use it later.
Great, thank you. Just want to confirm there's no raised hands at this time?
There are no raised hands, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank staff for the great presentation.
Excuse me,
I'm sorry.
this is Commissioner Uribe, and I couldn't find the raise hand button.
That's okay, Commissioner.
I did have 2 quick questions. I was wanting to know, why did the Turnpike, if you could elaborate a little bit more, why did the Turnpike decide not to do the extension on Highway 50? And then I had a follow-up question as far as the Orange Hoffner extension. Originally, that included bicycle trails and so forth, and could you elaborate a little of what that looks like now? Because I know things have changed.
Certainly. So first with the Turnpike project, we received a letter from Florida Turnpike that it was not deemed financially feasible after they completed the PD&E. So therefore that portion of the project came off, but there was still, prior to the Colonial Parkway, the need for the 6-lane widening in that section. So District 5 is moving forward and has funded the construction for the 6-lane widening portion without the Expressway Colonial Parkway component.
Got it. That's okay. Great. That was my concern, the 6-lane. And then if you could just expand a little, because I know that the Orange extension to Hoffner, the improvement has changed, and I just wondered if you could just elaborate just slightly what that would include.
Sure. So the project from Sand Lake up to Hoffner or Mandalay will be part of the 3R resurfacing project that will take into account the planning study recommendations for complete streets and anything that could be done within the right-of-way that's part of the resurfacing. We've worked with the Department of Transportation to add some additional funding to add those components in. So in the one-way sections in Edgewood, it would start looking at those on-street parking recommendations and bulb outs, and then other bike lane and amenities. But for the remaining section going all the way up to Holden and Gatlin, that is not within the resurfacing project, because the complete street improvements as part of that study required right-of-way. So that section had to hold off, but we took advantage of DOT's resurfacing schedule for that section north of Sand Lake to try to incorporate as many complete street improvements that were recommended out of the study as possible within it. There will still be some additional ones out of the right-of-way, but we got whatever we could within the right-of-way on that.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? We move on. Seeing no other comments, we're going to move on to the next briefing or presentation. It'll be from FDOT District 5 Transportation Incident Management Program. I'd like to ask FDOT staff to present.
Good morning. In the interest of time, I'm going to skirt through some of this, but please don't hesitate to ask any questions towards the end. Traffic incident management is the coordinated response to traffic incidents on the roadway, and I'm sure we have all been on the other side of that congestion or that frustration resulting from a crash. And the whole point of traffic incident management is to reduce congestion, whereby reducing the risk of secondary crashes, which sometimes are quite serious compared to a primary event that may just be a disabled vehicle, and the secondary crash is the one where somebody at a higher rate of speed crashes into that vehicle or into the queue of congestion resulting from that disabled vehicle. And unfortunately, in the last 2 years, we've seen an alarming trend of those secondary crashes involving our emergency responders. So our primary goals are responder safety and then safe, quick clearance of our roadways. And traffic incident management has and always will be about networking, building relationships with those who work together out on the road. So we've spent a lot of time in the last 2 years doing extensive outreach with our local partners, fire and rescue, law enforcement, and other groups that have a role in that incident management process. Next slide, please. And that includes a lot of education on traffic incident management principles. We've trained several hundred emergency responders throughout the district, as well as more than 100 people who are certified to train a federal curriculum on traffic incident management to help us get that word out. Next slide. And that training has paid off. Here's a slide of an incident down at Sand Lake and John Young, and this activity has actually gotten some national attention in the Tim Arena because of its unusual application. But here you can see a pickup truck in the middle of an intersection that's been involved in a T-bone crash. And before we could even get a road ranger down there to assist, the fire engine has already hooked a chain to that and is dragging it. Go ahead, next slide. Over to the shoulder, and here you can see now that crashed vehicle is on the shoulder, which opens up the intersection for other traffic, and also now puts every other responder who has to come to that scene, whether it's law enforcement to do the investigation or a tow truck to pick up the vehicle, puts them in a safer environment to do what they need to do. So Orange County has kind of led the initiative with that, and like I said, it's gotten a lot of positive attention because of their proactive hand in incident clearance. Next slide. And this is what we call the TIM timeline, and it really breaks down an incident scene from the time that it occurs up until we get responders on scene until we return everything to the normal traffic flow. And a lot of what we've done to this point has kind of revolved around that response area. Next slide. That includes our Road Ranger program, which has been a staple on I-4 for many years, being one of the first programs in the state. And of course, we've had Road Rangers on CFX for many years as well. They not only provide those courtesy services like tire changes and provision of gas, but their real purpose there is in protecting our responders on scene and helping motorists either get back onto the road or into an area of safety so that we minimize that risk of secondary crash. Next slide. We also have a program that we started 2 years ago called RISC, which is Rapid Incident Scene Clearance. And this is an incentive program with a specified group of tow vendors who have an extensive portfolio of equipment and trained personnel to help us with those really big incidents like overturned semis, overturned dump trucks, where they lose a load of whatever across the roadway. And these incidents in the past have often shut down the interstate, anywhere from a few hours up to 10, 12 hours. So in our first year of that program, we averaged an 83-minute clearance time, which is great. We're getting ready to put a new contract out We're going to make some tweaks to what we already have to make it even better. And then we're going to also include a program called Safe Tow, which will help us to address those really minor incidents. For example, a semi that breaks down in the middle of I-4, which happens far more than we would like. Right now, we're at the mercy of that, either a company, a tow truck company to get out there or them to call their own tow company. This will allow us to send a tow truck out there just to get them out of the way. So it's just to hook up to them and pull them either to the shoulder or to the next exit to an area of safety and where they're no longer impeding traffic. Next slide. When we look at those big incidents like the overturned semis, we realize that they accounted for actually a very small percentage of what we do, less than 0.5% of our incidents that we work in a year. So even though they can have significant savings with several hours per incident, we have thousands of other incidents that were not being improved upon with programs like RISK. So we started looking at what else we could do, sat down with our partners, and one of the things that we identified was helping our partners like law enforcement or fire and rescue identify exactly where they're going and what they're going to. It's amazing sometimes how often we get misinformation about where an incident, a crash has happened. And so for fire and rescue in particular, that can be a real challenge if the incident is dispatched in the wrong direction or maybe even 3 or 4 miles away from where it's actually occurred, can impact who is actually responding to that incident, be it a different fire station or even an entirely different jurisdiction. If a fire truck gets dispatched in the wrong way, making that U-turn in an interstate environment can be a very dangerous maneuver, or they have to go up to the next exit, turn around and come back. So it was looking at ways that we could help get them information to narrow that response time. Here in our Regional Traffic Management Center, we get incidents up on camera in about 1.5 to 2 minutes. So if we have an effective way to get that information back to our partners, then that gives them plenty of time to adjust their response accordingly. Next slide. So we have a new program, which is an interoperability communications program, which does allow us that direct level of contact with many of our emergency response dispatch centers, allows us voice communications with them, as well as the ability to share video so they can see exactly where they're sending units to. This is an overturned dump truck down on the ramp to the airport off of 528, and this was our view on camera. Next slide. And this was the view that an officer on scene was able to share back with me, which through those communications, I learned that this was limestone. The equipment we were having out there was just grinding it up and making it that much more difficult to remove, and allowed us to then work to get a sweeper out there to help clear this in a more timely manner. Next slide. We also use it for large-scale events, such as when the president visited last summer. We were able to tie in all the agencies that participated in that event, as well as the airports, the trauma centers, all the local stakeholders who participate in those large-scale events, bring everybody into one network and share information to help us work better together. And Chief Rolone, who has been with OPD for, I think, in excess of 25 years, had said that this was one of the best coordinated events that we've had in his tenure with OPD. Next slide. We also use it over in Brevard County when we do the shuttle launches. Just last weekend, we had the first manned flight in the last 9 years, and think that we probably had well over 500,000 people there. We're still waiting for the final numbers, but that's a lot of people to move into a small area and to get back out of there safely and efficiently. So again, allows us to bring all those partners together in managing that traffic flow. Next slide. Beyond that, we started looking at, now we have a way to get information to our partners quickly, but then also how we can get information more quickly and more timely on those incidents so that we can share with our partners quicker. And so, next slide. We have a couple of initiatives, including a research project with the University of Florida, where we are looking at large-scale CAD integration, which is computer-aided dispatch. So again, we get the notification as quickly in the process as possible, and then that 1.5 to 2 minutes, we can get the information back out to our responders about what they are headed to. Everything that we're doing now, we are also looking at the technology that goes along with it and how over time we can then integrate that in moving forward with the connected and autonomous vehicle programs. We're developing a GIS tool that puts a lot of information into the hands of our responders so that, again, we work better together. For example, when we do close down the interstate for a major crash and we have to set up a diversion, it's usually our responders out on the road who are taking the lead in that, but they don't know where we have that integrated corridor management or that enhanced signal timing to help flush that traffic through. So now we can provide that information right to them. It's also going to have stuff like cross-drain information for our environmental folks, signals, where they're located, who maintains them. Just a lot of different information that will help us keep everyone on the same page and working collaboratively. Next slide. And how all of this comes together, just wanted to share a couple performance measures with you. Next slide. If you look at the third set of bars down there, that is the open roads. And statewide, we have an open roads policy to clear any incident from the time the first responder gets on scene until travel lanes are cleared within 90 minutes. Here in our district, we've set ours at 60 minutes. And as you can see from the third set of bars there, we are doing very well. Our last quarter was just under 30 minutes. The gray bar there is the last fiscal year, and the green is the 12-month average. So you can see that compared to the last 12 months, we're doing even better. And this is for district-wide. Next slide. And then looking at the same data there for CFX. Again, well under that 60-minute goal. Next slide. Across the district, all 9 counties, we've seen over the last 3 years anywhere from 16 to 53% reduction in our district-wide clearance time. So a lot of that teamwork and collaboration out on the road and between agencies is really paying off. Next slide. And then finally, looking at those secondary crashes, if you look at the 2 pink bars on either end, that is looking at the quarter in comparison to the previous year's quarter. And then the ones in between are the quarters in between. The point of this is to show that we have that downward trend displayed by the dotted line there, that our secondary crashes are reducing. And the big difference between those quarters is just the time of the year and when we see our heaviest travel volumes. Next slide. And the same thing for CFX. If you look at last year's quarter, which is on your far left, compared to the more recent quarter in fiscal year 20, again, significant improvements there with a significant downward trend in the number of secondary crashes. And that is all I have. If you all have any questions for me.
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation. I'd like to ask staff, do we have any raised hands?
We do, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Zimbauer.
Commissioner Zimbauer. Commissioner Zimbauer, can you unmute your mic? No, we cannot hear you. Commissioner Zimbauer, I'll ask again.
We're having trouble hearing Commissioner Zimbauer. While he works out that technical difficulty, Mr. Chairman, we do have a hand by Mayor Jerry Demings.
Okay. Mayor Demings. Mayor Demings.
All right, I'm with you. I wanted to jump in here real quickly. And I think that the data is promising, and during the nearly 40 years that I spent as a law enforcement officer, and a good portion of that either managing response to accidents or responding directly myself, I do believe that the faster we get roads open, the safer our roadways are. And as you all know, in most cases, the sheriff's offices don't respond to traffic crash investigations within the unincorporated areas. It is primarily handled by the Florida Highway Patrol. Many of the metropolitan counties now do have sheriff's offices taking minor traffic crash reports. And so it is something that even when I was sheriff, I contemplated getting in the business of having my deputies respond to minor traffic crashes to assist in getting the roads open quicker and dealing with the safety-related issues. It's an impact on work, and probably when I really looked at it, the deputies were responding anyway, and sometimes holding a minor traffic crash scene for the highway patrol to arrive. So they were being tied up anyway with the traffic crashes. So it is this is an area that I'm going to, have further conversation with Sheriff Nina about the potential for the sheriff's office here taking on a role of responding to minor traffic crashes, moving the major traffic crash scenes, et cetera, to the highway patrol. So I just wanted to share that with the group, and more to follow.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll now go to Commissioner Chairman Zimbauer. Chairman?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me, Chairman?
Yes, we can.
What the difficulty was there. A couple questions for Cheryl. In the 12-month numbers, has there been, and if so, what
Commissioner Zimbauer, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Barely.
Let me see if I can. How about now?
Yes, sir.
Question is, in your 12-month numbers, what consideration or algorithms have been considered for downturn due to traffic counts in the COVID era, say for the last 3 months?
So we haven't, anecdotally, I can tell you that our numbers of crashes, we have looked at traffic volumes and we've looked at traffic crashes, and those numbers are down significantly. Looking at them as a rate, I haven't gone that far yet. We haven't gotten to the end of the quarter yet to where we'll go back and assess the periods that involve the COVID response period. So I will have updated data on that at the end of this month, and I would be glad to send that over to you all.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Zimbauer, any other questions?
Are you there?
And we're here. We just can't hear you, Commissioner Zimbauer.
County-owned computer, what can I tell you? So is there any breakout differential on time on a THI incident versus non-THI incident?
If you could just clarify the question one more time. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the beginning of that.
Based on THI, non-THI.
Okay, yes. We don't, as far as the data that we track regularly, we don't on a quarterly basis break out THI versus non-THI response and investigation time, but we have been doing some investigation of that relative to some different technologies that have been introduced in the Central Florida area, like the LiDAR scanners for the THI investigation purposes, and looking at different ways in which technology can be introduced to reduce those times. So with that particular study, we did see a reduction in the incident clearance time, but there's even more evolving technologies as drones and different things come available to help with that process. Can't hear you again.
Commissioner Zimbauer, your mic is going in and out. If you are able to type your question into the chat box, and I'll be happy to relay it for you. Mr. Chairman, he has signaled that he's yielding.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Any other raised hands?
There are no others, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I want to thank Cheryl for her presentation and look forward for additional updates. At this time, moved on to public comments. If anyone in the public wishes to comment, please use the raise hand function and you'll be recognized, or dial *9 on your phone keypad. We'll unmute your mic, and after you're recognized, please state your name and address for the record, and your comments will be limited to 2 minutes. Are there any individuals with their raised hands, staff?
Mr. Chairman, there are no raised hands at this moment.
Are there any written comments?
There were no written comments received prior to the meeting.
Okay, great. Are there any final board member comments? Any board members raising their hands? I'd like to ask staff for any board members raising their hands.
There are no additional raised hands, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, great. We are going to just re-announce the meeting change. Our next meeting will be Monday, June 29th at 9 a.m. This will be a virtual meeting, and it will take place of our July meeting. MetroPlan Orlando will be providing information on how to sign in. And if there's no other further comments, I'd like to adjourn this meeting. Any other further comments?
There are no hands, Mr. Chairman.
This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all very much.